Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Rachna.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Akshay. Okay, I think we can get started.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, ma'am. We'll get started. The other day we finished doing the resolutive which is a nascent scientific method. But things did not stop with the resolutive compositive method. Things led to how how did I manage this? Yeah, sorry about that. The resolutive compositive method led to further the spirit of inquiry and also to the furtherance of the uh, spirit of humanism and also led to the discovery of more and more scientific scientific phenomena and also to the invention of scientific tools which all contributed to the furtherance of scientific thinking and also scientific knowledge. Okay, so the resolutive compositive method led to this. What came up as all of the above was came to be called the natural sciences or sciences that dealt with things in nature and in the universe. The emergence of the natural sciences led to the demystification of the universe, and what were hitherto considered to be supernatural or divine simply were now understood as natural phenomena along with the underlying causes that led to these natural phenomena. Okay. The resolutive compositive method, like I told you the other days, and I'm not going to spend much time on that today. It was a nascent scientific method. Okay. And if you remember, you will see that this nascent scientific method was, I had drawn an analogy, which was like that it was like small children. Uh, if you give them a toy, they try to break it apart because it is a part of human nature to know how something works. It's not an urge to be destructive. It is not an urge to be destructive. It is an urge to know what something is. And it is something that begins with birth itself, this process. And I told you when somebody had given this example that people put things in their mouth, they do that, little babies, small children, very small children, they do that because the development of the sensory uh, structures in the lips is more pronounced and happens at an earlier age than the development of other senses. So that is the reason why when you give a little baby or a very little child something, the first thing they do is they put that to their mouth because they're trying to know what it is. They are trying to know or understand the object that has been given to them. So what this indicates is the fact that right from our birth, we have this curiosity. And I'm not using curiosity in its pejorative or negative sense. I'm using it in its positive sense. Uh, we have this curiosity and we want to know, we want to understand. Okay, because if you look at ontology says, especially Heideggerian ontology, and I told you ontology is the pursuit of being, written with a capital B, which is understanding our state of existence. So if you look at this particular urge, it is an ontological urge, and it is because, again, to use a Heideggerian metaphor, he says being born is like being thrown into the world. Okay, it's like somebody has thrown us into this world, and we know nothing about this world, complete opposite of Plato. We know nothing about this world, and what we are trying to do is that we are trying to find out who we are. Why are we here? Okay, and Heidegger came up with this thing that we also have a certain anxiety right from the time of birth about ourselves. And this anxiety was called by Freud, who was a medical doctor, Sigmund Freud, Freud. Freud basically called this existential anxiety, which is we don't know why we are born. We somehow seem to have uh, knowledge of the fact that we'll die. We seem to have this knowledge with birth only. This is the one thing that we seem to know right from the time that we are born, that we will also die. Okay, and that is what makes up our existential, makes up for our existential anxiety. Because we don't know why we are born, we don't know why we die, and we don't know why we have to endure different forms of pain, okay, suffering, pleasures. What are all these things? What are they doing with us? Why should we go through all these things? So, these ontological questions needed answers, and the resolutive compositive method started that nascent scientific method, that scientific thinking in the modern period, so that we can try and make sense of our being or of our existence. Whether we make sense of it or not is a different issue. Okay, why are we born? Why do we die? I don't think there is any philosophy or a philosophical system in the West except Pythagoras and people like Plato, uh, who don't explain death, by the way. They say you die and you're reborn. Uh, but even that is not said by any other philosophers in the Western tradition. Whereas in the Indian tradition, if you look at this, what we find is that these are questions that have been answered, albeit not in a scientific way, as the Westerners would call them, but there are definitely philosophical answers. There is a whole idea of Advaita, Visishtadvaita, and Dvaita, and there are a number of Gitas, the first of which is supposed to be Ashtavakra Gita. I think that is the first, maybe it is not. Then there is the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which is certainly not the second, it is the eighth, if I'm not mistaken. And there is an Avadhuta Gita. There are all in all more than 60 Gitas. I don't know if you are aware of this. I think there are about 64 different Gitas, and all these, along with the Vedas, primarily the Vedas, the Upanishads were those which came in to tinker with the Vedas and introduce some changes into them. But we do have this system of thought which explains both death, life, birth, life, death. And when I say life, it explains why we undergo suffering. And it is more in the nature of a supermind at work as far as the Indian tradition is concerned. It is not based in empiricism. It is not based, it doesn't require evidence. When I was working in TISS, one of my colleagues there, she always used to say, evidence-based research. And if you actually look at even Western scientific research, where is the evidence? If everything is evidence-based, then that should be the final form of knowledge. Then how is it that Galileo's physics were replaced by Newtonian physics? And how is it that Newtonian physics, some of them, were challenged and portrayed differently by Einstein? If they were all evidence-based, as people call it, and I want you to remember this, because where we are going with all this is positivism and empiricism, and they talk about this whole evidence-based thing. So you see that while people talk about evidence, Newtonian physics have been demonstrated to be questionable. They've been demonstrated to be questionable. Einsteinian theory of relativity itself has been questioned, especially by Surendranath Bose. And I told you that it is After Surendranath Bose and another British scientist of the 1960s who the went by the name of Peter Higgs. Uh, it is a combination of Higgs and Bose that led to the uh, creation of the Higgs boson particle, which people are searching for, which is supposed to be, um, well, how do you put it? It is supposed to be the particle that led to the creation of the entire universe. So you have this organization, CERN, in Switzerland, and this particular organization has built what is called a large uh, hadron based particle collider in which matter and antimatter are supposed to come into contact and see what they produce. So many years ago, there was that that hadron collider was going to be used to bring about this collision between matter and antimatter. And so the world actually held its breath. People were scared that if they collided matter and antimatter, they had the potential to wipe out the earth. That is what they thought would be the power of that. Ultimately, the whole thing fizzled out. Somehow it never happened. People didn't go ahead with that experiment the way they wanted to in order to identify what happens when matter and antimatter come together. Okay. Uh, if you don't feel like reading this whole thing uh, in a, as a science, if you really don't want to read up quite a few of these things as histories, then I'll tell you one easy way out. One easy way out is there are a set of novelists, English novel writers, and these novelists have carried out extensive research on some of these things that we talk about academically, and they basically put that content, sorry, put that content out for everyone to consider as a part of as a part of some kind of a story, as a part of some kind of a story. They take it as something, they give this information. Irwin Shaw, IRWIN, Irwin Shaw, SHAW, is the one who is actually uh, true to being a historian of ideas, even though He's doing it like fiction, but he doesn't have an adventure plot or something in them. Uh, so his books like Agony and Ecstasy, which documents the life and work of Michael Angelo, and he also wrote about Leonardo da Vinci. He's one person you should read. Books by Irwin Shaw. Apart from Irwin Shaw, you have writers like Ken Follett. Ken Follett originally wrote cheap thrillers, but he suddenly transformed into, I think, once people started reading his works, he showed who he really is. And starting with The Pillars of the Earth, which is set in British feudalism, you will find that Ken Follett gives us dollops of history in a wafer thin plot. I call it a wafer thin plot, not negatively. The plot is incidental. There is no mystery there, nothing there. It is more of a documentary of some families suffering in a particular period of time. And so Ken Follett is a great source of wonderful knowledge, not written with the jargon of academics, which might put people off. And you should also read books by James Michener, Michener. Michener wrote books like Poland, Texas, the natives of Samoa, the Samoan Islands, that is, which are all historical. These novels are historical novels. So James Michener is another uh, person whom you can read. And of course, nowadays you have Dan Brown. In fact, his book, Angels and Demons, deals with the CERN, and it deals with this large uh, Hadron Particle Collider. It talks about how the World Wide Web protocol came into being. So, pretty decent research. And even his other book, the more celebrated one, which is the Da Vinci Code. If you put aside that conclusion, which the Christians found unacceptable, uh, that the bloodline of Jesus Christ continues. But Dan Brown claims that he swears by his sources and says that it is there, that line continues. Just as Prophet Muhammad's line continued. Uh, Incidentally, all those people who have their name starting with Sayyid, Syed, or Sayyad, okay, these people are supposed to be descendants of Prophet Muhammad, his bloodline, which may not be the case anymore, but it once was the case. So he does make a point about that. So you can read these kind of books, which are entertaining and also give you very useful information. Arthur Haley, his novels are also very, very informative. So you can learn a lot by reading these people. So maybe if you don't want to burden yourself reading these actual texts, which give you these kind of uh, this kind of information, you probably can try out selectively reading good novels which give you the information anyway, but you'll have to learn how to filter out the part which is fiction from the part that is not fiction. And that will come with experience as you read. Anyway, so if you look at the whole thing, the whole process unleashed by the resolutive compositive method, it led to a further spirit of inquiry, which means people said, now, till then they were told that you cannot use your brain, you cannot use your faculty of thought in order to understand the world. But suddenly they started seeing that the Christian dictum of that which you did not create cannot be understood by you being proved false by the resolutive compositive method. It is because of the resolutive compositive method that we have now come to understand water, now meaning we came to understanding of this variety a very long time ago, that water is not just water, it's not a liquid. It is a coming together of two gases in a certain proportion, which is hydrogen and oxygen, coming together in a certain proportion, which is H2O. Okay, that leads to water, right? So tomorrow, if you want to harvest hydrogen, because that is by the way going to be the new direction of what are now being called fuel cell automobiles, and those which will be driven by uh, driven all those things that need to be driven by right now the internal combustion engine. They will be driven by uh, separating oxygen and hydrogen within a fuel cell, and there'll be a membrane in between, and you channelize the hydrogen to drive the vehicle with its energy. And so the hydrogen fuel cell is already being made, by the way, by companies like Mercedes Benz, even Hyundai for that matter. And the only emissions from this will be pure distilled water. So it's not science fiction. This is research that has been carried out From next year onwards, not in India, elsewhere, you will see the launch of fuel cell driven vehicles. You'll see them. Okay. So hydrogen, we can harvest it now because we know how to separate it from oxygen. And all that started with the resolutive compositive method. That we say that even a gas like carbon dioxide is not one element, but two elements, carbon and oxygen. Okay, CO2. So that is how, if it is O2, it is oxygen. If it is O3, then it becomes ozone. And we know that there is a protective covering of the Earth's atmosphere by a layer of ozone, which prevents the sun's harmful ultraviolet rays from reaching us. Because if they reach us, then we are prone to all kinds of cancers, mainly skin cancer. So just see the fact that it has led to a spirit of inquiry, and that led to the furtherance of the spirit of humanism. Humanism is the belief in the ability of the human being, and all this led to the discovery of scientific phenomena. By that, I mean not that these phenomena didn't exist before. They existed but were not understood. The prime example being an eclipse. People couldn't explain what caused a solar eclipse, what caused a lunar eclipse. They couldn't. Okay? It's only with the growth of the spirit of scientific inquiry, the growth of humanism, and consequently the use of human rationality, that we started understanding how eclipses happen. Otherwise, they were seen as some kind of divine phenomena. Now we see them as natural phenomena. There's no divinity in that at all. And there's an invention of tools of science. Galileo was doing the cannonball experiments, okay, and he also invented the telescope. Mathematics grew under Copernicus and Kepler. So all these things contributed to furtherance of scientific thinking and scientific knowledge. Scientific knowledge is that which can be explained in naturalist terms without having to take recourse to supernatural terms. And all these things were actually dealing with things in nature and in the universe. And since they were mainly dealing, universe and nature are not seen as two separate things, uh, unless you see nature as human nature or particular natures. But the generic usage of nature is that which tells us that nature is the universe. And so we have uh, the natural sciences. They came to be called the natural sciences because they were dealing with things in nature and providing scientific and plausible explanations to natural phenomena. So that is how we had the birth of the natural sciences. Okay, and the natural sciences explained the galaxy, it explained the number of planets. We still don't know about poor Pluto. Somebody said it's not a planet. Now again, people are saying that it is a planet, but that dispute is yet to be resolved. But anyway, so uh, so you see that we are dealing with things in nature and understanding them as natural phenomena. Like, for example, today we know that there is a connection between the moon and the tides in the oceans and seas. We know that there is a connection. Okay. At one time, people didn't know in the West. It was known in India, by the way, right from the beginning. The moon has been seen as an influencer of the weather as well as oceanic tides. But the Westerners came to know about it a little later, but they came to know about it. So the emergence of the natural sciences basically led to the demystification of the universe. Otherwise, everything in the universe was seen as a mystery, something that couldn't be understood. And the lack of understanding led to superstitions and great many superstitious thinking, superstitious, not great many. It led to superstitious thinking and thought, and things which were previously attributed to the divine anger or pleasure or whatever were now being understood as natural phenomena along with the underlying causes of the natural phenomena. Previously, if there were no rains, the monsoon was bad, then people believed that it was the anger of the gods. Okay, but nowadays people talk about, I think I talked about it the last time, the El Nino effect in the Pacific Ocean, which sucks out the moisture from the atmosphere, and therefore there isn't adequate rainfall or sometimes any rainfall at all. We understand why it rains in some regions more than why it rains in other regions. So we now have a category called a rain shadow region. A rain shadow region is that which does not receive the same amount of rainfall as a normal region would. And we know that if there are trees and if there are hills, then the rainfall is bountiful. And all the tropical forests, especially the ones in India, the ones in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, in Karnataka, it's called Bandipur, and the same thing once you cross over into Tamil Nadu, the Eastern Ghats, it is called Mudumalai. These are rainforests. We don't call them forests. We call them rainforests because these forests have first and foremost come into being because of rain, and they continue to draw rain. And the diversity of life forms in the Nilgiris, which is a part of the, what do we say, the Eastern Ghats, which are also called an Allamalai region, you will see that these are home to different kinds of flora and fauna which are not there elsewhere. Similarly, if you go to the Sundarbans again is a rainforest region, as is the Kaziranga National Park. It was actually Kaziranga. Now it's become a national park. So you'll find that these are all places which draw bountiful rainfall because they have a lot of greenery and they have hills, mountains. All of them have that. So we understand these patterns of rainfall. We understand soil. Sorry. We understand soils. We have different kinds of soils, and we know what kinds of soils are fertile. We know what kind of crops can be grown in what kind of soils. Okay? We know, for example, that in alluvial soil, you can grow paddy. If you have black soil, then that is conducive for the growth of cotton and tobacco. So we know these things. And scientific knowledge about nature progressed. So much so that today we are talking about biofuels, ethanol. Okay, ethanol is just one of the biofuels. In India, we have the good fortune of having Jatropha in it grows in hostile soils, and it can be blended with diesel to create biodiesel. So we don't have to, the Americans were idiots. Once they found that, ethanol mix was making petrol cheaper, they converted all their agricultural lands into growing corn, because corn is the main source of ethanol. And then they found themselves with food scarcity. Okay. So if you're looking for biofuels, you have to be careful not to affect your food security. You shouldn't have a scarcity of food. Because the Americans didn't realize capitalists grow because this brings money. So they did all cash crop agriculture and found themselves without food and having to import foods for themselves. So you can see that we know how to harness nature now. We also learn from other people's experiences. So we do understand why earthquakes happen. We understand tectonic plate movements. We understand magmatic plate movements. We understand what are volcanoes today. We know which volcanoes are still alive and which are not alive. And we know what living in a volcanic region can mean. Because if you look at the Japanese islands, what do we see? We see that they are located very close to, some of them on top of volcanoes. These volcanoes are in the sea. They don't have to be on land only. Volcanoes can also be under the sea. Okay, so we know what can happen there. We know that you should not build nuclear reactors in areas where there can be volcanic activity, thanks to the Daiichi Fukushima incident a few years ago when there was a tsunami, TSUNAMI. What does that mean? Somebody tell me. Tsunami?
Cyclone, sir.
Sorry, what did you say, Akshay?
Cyclone.
Cyclone. Okay.
In different places, they are called differently. They are
In different areas, they are called differently. Okay. Yeah, Rachna, you're trying to say something.
Uh, Ocean waves moving at very high speed.
Motion waves moving at
oceanic wind.
Ocean.
Oceanic wind.
wind, oceanic
Winds, of
wind.
course. Waves, sir.
Anyone else? Is there anyone else?
Moving at very high speed.
Okay, I got that. But is there anyone else left or have they all left?
There, sir. It's a Japanese word which means wave.
What waves?
The sea waves. The
No,
ocean.
no. That's why I asked you. Tsunami, you're right. It is a Japanese word. And it basically means harbor waves. Okay? When waves get into a harbor, do you know what a harbor is? Anybody?
Dock.
HARBOUR. Or if you want to be American,
Along with the sea coast. I think ship where the ships are kept.
No, why are they called harbors? Hmm? Why are they called harbors?
No.
They are called harbors mainly because these are enclaves of seawater. If they are natural harbors, like the one that you have in ports like Vishakhapatnam, okay, if you go to a port like Vishakhapatnam, then it is a natural harbor. It's a natural harbor because the harbor is pretty deep and it can receive, and it's in an enclave. You know, it is in between two hills. You have to come from inside to between two hills, and the water is deep enough to take a ship that is fully laden with cargo. Okay, so Vishakhapatnam actually has two harbors. One is the main harbor, and for huge bulk tankers and huge ships, they also have what is actually called an outer harbor. And you cannot have outer harbors anywhere and everywhere. Do you know why you can have an outer harbor in Vishakhapatnam? Anybody? Hmm? Any idea?
No, sir.
No.
No, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Vishakhapatnam sits on a continental shelf. So any of these big ships can come to about uh, 300 meters near the shore. 300 meters near the shore. Okay, that's how close a huge ship can come with all its cargo in it. That's because it's a continental shelf. What is a continental shelf? You have water like this over the shelf, and suddenly there's nothing. There's a drop. Suddenly there's a drop. Okay, so that is the reason why in Vishakhapatnam you have no big beaches. Has anyone been to Vishakhapatnam? If you ever go to Vishakhapatnam, try to look for a beach. You won't find one. You know, it'll be just this much. You don't have these big beaches. Go to Chennai. Chennai, you'll find huge beaches. Okay, you have huge beaches because that's not the continental shelf. And the harbor in Chennai is an artificial harbor. It had to be deepened through dredging in order to make ships come inside. Okay, so that is the difference between a natural harbor and an artificial harbor. All right, and in Chennai you have miles and miles of sand before you can get to uh, before you get to what you call the water. And if you go to Rameshwaram, in Rameshwaram, the sea comes from between two mountains, and you can walk half a kilometer in the sea, and the water will come only up to your waist. That is also a harbor, but that is not a harbor that is conducive for ships to come inside. That's also a natural harbor, but it is too shallow. Leave alone a ship, even a boat cannot come in. A tsunami is actually harbor waves, waves that usually, the way harbors are, the tides and all those things don't affect the waves inside the harbor. Okay, but in a tsunami, the severity, the severity of the force of the water is so much that you will find that water comes everywhere, including inside the harbor. I don't know, somebody shot a video of a tsunami that happened in which year? It happened in maybe 2004, 2005. I
2004, sir, I think.
okay. Uh,
Sir, what is
Hmm.
the difference between tsunami and cyclone?
cyclone is a low pressure system. It's a bay depression, or what is called a low pressure system that leads to high force of winds, and those, they are also called gales, along with rainfall. That is a cyclone. Okay, in a tsunami there's no rainfall. There's there needn't be a rainfall, and usually there isn't one, because it is not something, not a phenomenon happening in the sky, but it is a phenomenon happening under the water. Usually volcanic eruptions are the ones that lead to tsunamis. So in the tsunami of 2004, it was actually, I don't know how I saw it, but it has haunted me ever since I saw that. This was shot in Jaffna in Sri Lanka, and this tsunami affected our coast also in 2004. But this thing that somebody shot was the water withdrawing. The sea started withdrawing. You know, it was at one level, it's an amazing video, seeing such a natural phenomenon. Okay, the sea just started withdrawing. It went back by up to 2 kilometers. Can you believe that? Up to 2 kilometers, it went back. And there were all these small kids who were so fascinated with what was happening. And then they found that there were sunken boats. Now that the sea withdrew, went backwards, all those sunken boats and all became visible. So they didn't understand what is happening, and they ran towards all these sunken boats, and they started running into the sea as it was withdrawing, running towards the sea as it was withdrawing. And then all of a sudden, you have these huge waves rising up to 40 meters in height. It is scary. Believe me, it is scary. The sea has gone back, and then in no time, it rises 40 feet and starts coming back to the shore. All these kids who went. And this water came back with such force that it entered the town of Jaffna. It entered the town of Jaffna. So tsunami is a scary thing. And people found that this happened because of a volcanic eruption somewhere in the Indian Ocean, around Thailand or something. That's what triggered this. That's what triggered this. A very sad thing. It's that at one moment it is fascinating the way the sea is withdrawing, and then the water coming with that huge waves, huge, powerful waves, and all those children dead. So it haunts me even today, the death of the children. Anyway, so now we understand what causes a tsunami. We understand that it's this tectonic plate and magmatic plates on the ocean floor, volcanoes on the ocean floor, they lead to tsunamis. So we can explain them now as natural phenomena. I went to Badrinath. In Badrinath, you have what are called Ushna Kunds. Okay, so you have snow. Okay, it's absolutely cold. You have snow in the winter, and there is this hot water spring, almost boiling hot, but not really boiling hot. You can step into it without getting scalded. Ushnakund is the name given to that, a hot water spring. At one time, people said this is near the Badrinath temple, so this is the miracle of Lord Shiva. Today, we know that hot water springs are nothing but water that is under the ground getting heated up due to there being openings in the magmatic plate, and it comes shooting up from the magmatic plates and the tectonic plates. It comes and forms itself into a pool. At one time, it was called a miracle that you had hot water in a cold place. Now we know that it's nothing but nature. So that is the demystification part of it. That is the demystification part of it. So if you have no rain, you'll say El Nino. If you have too much rain, you'll say La Nina. If you have a tsunami, you'll say it is either tectonic plates or volcanic activity, which also is a tectonic plate and magmatic plate activity only. But you can also have this without a volcano. That's why I'm mentioning them separately. So you have the natural sciences that came in and demystified nature to a great extent. They demystified nature. I don't say they demystified the nature completely. They haven't. Nobody says that these are divine phenomena, but there are still natural phenomena that escape a natural science explanation. Maybe one day they'll come, it's an ongoing process. So the natural sciences established themselves. And what did they bring? They brought in what is that word? It just went out of my head. This is what they did. Okay. This is what the natural sciences did. Oh, I have to add something. They brought in scientific predictions. So, predictions that are not, though I keep telling you that astrology is not alchemy, just because I am teaching you something, and I'm a very bad teacher, that doesn't mean that what I'm teaching is rubbish. I might be teaching it like it is rubbish, but let's say political science. If I'm teaching it badly, then I can make rubbish out of it. If I teach it properly, then it is not rubbish. It is far from being rubbish, right? So you can't say that astrology is not at all a science, that it is an alchemy, just because today there aren't astrologers who can, for example, uh, understand the idea of what astrology is. I'll close with a story, my own story. Okay, I was born at 1:15 a.m. Now, the Indian system of calculating time uses what are called jhamus. Okay, it will be first jhamu, second jhamu. So a night, for example, will be divided into 3 or 4 jhamus. And it is how close you are to the sunrise that will basically tell you uh, whether you were born, let's say, if it is the night between 31st and 1st, okay, 31st of one month and the 1st of the next month. So the jhamu and the calculation of the jhamu is the one that decides whether you were born on 31st or you were born on 1st. Now, the Indian calculation is not 12 o'clock in the night as the change of date. And it is also not sunrise. It is according to Jamus, the change of date. Okay. So one astrologer basically calculated my date, let us say, as 31st, because I was born at 1:15. But nowadays, if you put that into a computer that generates there is a program that generates your natal chart, or the horoscope as it is called. Okay, so if you enter date, time of birth, it will take it as first, 1:15. It won't take it as 31st. Now that changes the planetary positions. Okay, so what happened in my natal chart was, when an old man of that time, when he made the chart, he put it as 31st. And now that thing is gone. People don't know how to calculate as per JAMUS. They rely on the computer, and the computer says I was born on the 1st, and my chart that was drawn by that old gentleman, if you look at which planet is in which house, it shows a complete difference. In the natal chart that he drew, the planet Jupiter, which is called Guru, was in its 10th house, according to the chart that he drew. And the 10th house is the house of the Guru. So he said this boy will become a teacher. Okay. But if you put it as first, then Jupiter sits in the 9th house. That changes the prognosis totally. That changes the predictions totally. So people today don't even know which Jhamu is what. That is a lost knowledge. It's a lost knowledge. That's why it sounds like complete rubbish. You want that also to be done by a computer. Tomorrow that will only start predicting also. So therefore, please remember that if something fails, it's not necessarily because the subject is bad or the subject is incapable of explanation. It is because of the fact that there isn't a proper person who can use or teach that subject properly. That is how, what have been called the arts have been reduced to rubble. Okay. They have been subjects that are not taken by people who consider themselves intelligent. These subjects are, what is history? Ashoka planted trees, Akbar laid roads. Isn't that what we hear? Didn't anyone did anyone tell us that history is the mother of all knowledge, especially social scientific knowledge? Nobody told us that. Why? Because we think history is a recording of events of the past. That's what we think. Okay? Which is not what it is. History is a time continuum. It is also something about the future. So, I'll stop here today because I use that term social sciences. Tomorrow, we'll come to why the social sciences are not like the natural sciences and how the positivists wanted to duplicate the success that one found of the scientific method in the study of nature. They wanted to duplicate that or replicate that success in the study and understanding of society. So people like Auguste Comte, Auguste, Auguste Comte, Comte, a Frenchman, they created a movement called positivism. Not what I told you in the morning about Hegelian dead objectivity and positivity. Positivism as having a positive outlook. And he basically wanted to create reliable social sciences like the natural sciences through his idea, which he called positivism. We'll pick that up for discussion tomorrow. If you have any questions, shoot. Or are you all saying, please, Mr. Fatman, why don't you get out of our face? Is that it?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay. But I will get out of your face unless you have a doubt. All right then. I suppose there's no doubt to be asked. So I'll meet you tomorrow again and we'll pick up positivism, empiricism, and logical positivism.
Sir, hermeneutics.
Yes, when I do these things first, then we can talk about hermeneutics. Positivism, empiricism, it's against these things that hermeneutics came up in the modern period. In the modern period. They existed from the Greek period. That's a different issue. But they came up in the social sciences in the modern period against mainly positivism, logical positivism, and empiricism. Okay?
Okay.
Righto. So, thank you very much. And I promise you, like I told you, tomorrow, Louis Althusser, get ready for why we can't get rid of ideology. Get ready for horrible things like a repressive state apparatus, ideological state apparatus, interpellations. That's a word that was created by Mr. Louis Althusser. Okay, so I'll try and simplify it as much as possible. The good news for you is I found one small little compromise which will not compromise upon the quality of your knowledge, but will reduce the verbosity of Althusser substantially. So that's the good news. So it might be a little bit of sweat, but no tears, hopefully. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Sir, from where we can read this ideology? In which source?
Look for Jorge, Jorge, Jorge Larraín, Larrain, Larrain. The Concept of Ideology. That is the name of the book. Okay, it is available online. If you can put a VPN on your phone, you can even download it without paying for it from some sites. But you have to
Okay,
put a VPN. You know what a VPN is, right?
Virtual private network.
Yeah. So if you put a VPN, you can download those books.
Okay.
Okay. It'll cost you a bit of money to put the VPN because it has to be legal. Otherwise, it won't work. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you then.
Thank you, sir. See you tomorrow.
Yeah. See you tomorrow. Gentlemen, Prashant, Rakesh, see you tomorrow. I hope you're all
Sir,
doing well.
thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Same to you, sir.
Yeah.